That brings up a interesting topic of the gray man, right? When people talk about um, one-on-one encounters is one thing, but who maybe even dealt with this or see it in movies, it's a totally different mentality of the mob mentality that's going on,
Yeah.
right? And because you can individually make deals with a person, right? And you can be reasonable, but the mob mentality is completely different. So it was interesting to hear that, store managers would try this
Yeah.
approach, which would work with one person. Hey, just take it, I'm fine. Just don't destroy stuff or don't hurt me. But the mob doesn't have a brain like that. It has its own psychology, and as you pointed, probably the best thing is to not be there. So that,
Yeah.
or be invisible, probably. So could you talk about the concept of well, two things actually. One is the gray man, and one is strategic relocation, because I know you talk about this on your
Yeah.
channel. Could you expand upon these two concepts, please?
Yeah, the Grayman approach is basically hiding in plain sight, looking like everyone else, and that may work for certain things. Sometimes you cannot avoid it. It's, look, if you're in the middle of one of these race riots, or you're the white guy in South Africa while everything is burning down, there's a big chance that the crowd will turn against you, and just where all of a sudden someone takes a punch at you and they all just jump in and start kicking the guy, even when he falls. It's like an animalistic aspect of, all pecking on on the same chick that went down, like in a pen, or in like an engagement. People behave very much like animals when they feel like it. And if you think, if you have this civil approach of, I didn't do anything wrong, I don't hate you, why do you hate me? That's not understanding where you're at. So it may work or it may not. Look, in, like I was telling you before, with these people that went after, they were planning on looting a store, and the manager said, what is it we're hungry, we want food. Okay, take all the food you want. And the employees ran into the store. The employees themselves ran into the store and came out with grocery bags and left them. And they just picked them and went. Now, the following day, a crowd with a very different intent may end up crashing the place in spite of you giving the food, because they have something else in mind. You have to know what's really going on. So in terms of gray men, yes, try to dress like everyone else, try to behave like everyone else. It may work, it may not work. Sometimes, there was a case of a man, an English gentleman that escaped from Afghanistan, disguised as
Yes, I've heard about him. Yeah.
right. The guy escaped disguised as a Afghani himself. Of course, they didn't ask him anything. He would have, the moment he spoke, he probably would have been detected. But man, yeah, it did work for him. You just don't want to you want to look like everyone else, behave like everyone else. At a point, depending on where you're at, it's more about the behavior than the way you dress. For example, in the case of the rioting and some of the events in the United States, it's not so much about what you're wearing. Well, yeah, certain, like the Antifa, all dressed in black, and they have that kind of costume going on. The best thing, I suppose, these days is to try to be as neutral as possible and try to be just someone that is not involved. This has nothing to do with each person's own politics, which you're perfectly entitled to have. It's just not a good strategy from a survival perspective to make that public to everyone around you. So that's one of the ways you go about in terms of gray men. As of relocating where you're going to be living, man, we are seeing some interesting times lately, and I would try to stay away from some of the more conflictive areas. This goes, this is pretty obvious, but some of the major cities, some of the bigger metropolises may not be all that great. Try to go for a small, like-minded community. Again, the difference between United States and maybe some other places is that these days, United States is very polarized, and depending on what state you live in, you may be like fish in water or out of it. You may just fit perfectly well in that group, or you just may be surrounded by people that will, take a shot at you the first time they get a chance. So as of right now, I pay close attention to that, and try to, it's never easy to move, But well, you know this as well as I do. It's not easy, but it's not impossible. Especially just moving within your country, man, that is easy enough. Take a good long look at where you are. And I get it that some people may find themselves living in states that don't represent them all that well, but they have their family there, your friends, and that is super important. You know, keep all of that in mind and estimate how important and how much of a significance that has. Staying there or relocating where you may be more among like-minded people in the long run, or as things develop and get worse.
Right. And these last couple of years with the health crisis and everything going on really gave us, you know, a demo version of what could be happening if something would even turn even worse, right? This really showed us, you know, how some states or local politicians think about, you know, behind the curtain or what they're planning. So taking that into consideration, that doesn't matter which side.
Politicians in general, they say one thing. I mean, we're not getting into specifics because YouTube is quite delicate about this. But without going into details, we all know how we've been told something would never happen, and all of a sudden, a couple of months later, well, now we're going this way, man. Things are changing.
It becomes normalized in a couple of months, which normally would not be normalized. Would have taken years. Everything happens much faster. So people are having a hard time to understand your location could mean death or life, you know, in a situation like this. With that said, could you compare back in Argentina, what was the situation between urban and between rural environments? How would they fare from a security point or, you know, from a preparedness point? Could you compare these two environments, urban against rural?
Yeah, the case of Argentina is it's a little bit unique because it's an underpopulated country. It's a big country, so it's quite large. It's pretty much like most of, you know, it's like all of Europe in terms of the amount of land, but it's very underpopulated and most people live in the capital. You know, it's mostly focused in Buenos Aires, like the capital of the country. So it's a huge, massive city with millions of people, and the rest of the country is mostly not going to be saying uninhabited, but you have like a couple other big, you know, provinces with some bit larger cities and such. You know, some quite nice big cities, but then you have like all of Patagonia. You know, going south, you have, you know, a couple of cities, but it's mostly, it's quite empty. You definitely like the idea of having, you know, the ability of growing your own food, having your own water, your own well. All of these things are huge. But one of the things that became quite clear is that it's not always as simple as it looks. And, you know, looking at what happened in Argentina, you were a lot more exposed in some cases being on your own. If you lived in like what many people would think the ideal setting for this would be like, you know, living alone in a farm. Well, if you get attacked while living alone in a farm, you're very much exposed to whatever they want. While living in the city, you may still get robbed or, you know, suffer a home invasion, but usually it tends to be faster and they're going to be more like on the watch and looking around, and we cannot stay here for a couple of days. While living in the middle of nowhere, it has happened that they stay there for days torturing people. So is it nice to live in the country? Yes, I would love to live in the middle of nowhere. Maybe my wife would not be all that much. You know, she likes a little bit more being closer to town, but it's not all that simple. Especially, and one of the things I've noticed over the years is that many times my American subscribers and viewers don't get this because they say I live in the middle of nowhere, which is not really middle of nowhere like in Argentina, where you're really miles away if you want from the nearest road. But if you are in an isolated residence in the United States, maybe that's not a huge threat. Now, if you're in an isolated residence in South Africa, you're going to be becoming one of the statistics. Someone is going to be noticing you and you're probably going to be slaughtered on your sleep or worse. So what happens is that for most people in the United States, they haven't had to go through this. So as to see why this could be dangerous, because it hasn't happened. It hasn't gotten to that point of being dangerous. So Yeah, man, I'm living here in the middle of the woods or in the middle of the sticks, in the middle of the country, and we're perfectly fine. We just help one another. Sure. But you haven't had to deal with that kind of crime. That happens in other places, and they have a much clearer idea of how dangerous that can be at times. As you organize with people around you, if you move to a place with your family and such, sure, you can have your own little community. That involves many challenges as well. People fantasize about, we're going to be doing this, we're going to be doing that, I'm going to be moving with my extended family. Now, are they really going to be showing up when you plan, or are they going to be saying, no, it's not that bad, really, I'm staying home. No, I have to show up to work. No, I have to do this, that. So fantasy, reality, it's not always going side by side.
Boy, that's really a different perspective than what people have in the United States. Yeah. But I think that's the exact reason why it's important to have conversations like this with people who went through it and know these intricate details that, living off grid by yourself in a zombie apocalypse situation is different than a real life situation. So
yeah, and you know what, and I talk about this with someone that lives in Venezuela. Venezuela is a good example of a country that went nuts. I was just watching just hours ago how they executed a man on the street. They just pull him over, and the cop just draws his pistol and shoots him in the head, just like that, in the middle of the day. So that's a case of a country that's become a hellhole. You would think, okay, I'm living in a farm in Venezuela, growing my own food. No, this man that's been living there his entire life tells me no, because they steal everything that you grow. And if not, you don't find the fertilizers, you don't find the necessary supplies to keep that farm going. You don't find the pesticides, the medicines for the animals. It's not always that simple. And sure, there's people that still manage in spite of everything, but the worse it gets, the less likely you are to have your off-grid, self-sustainable homestead. It's a lot less likely to have that going on the more things go down the drain hole.
Yes, in a fully grid down hellhole situation, it's very different from a sort of halfway collapse that some countries experience. And I think you touched on something very important, or kind of referred on the topic that being alone, right, is not an answer. Having community is much more important. Maybe you are better off in a city if you have a good network, good connections, community, possible ways out, and a strategic plan how to deal with something. Maybe not in the middle of the city, but something like that, instead of being off grid by yourself. With that said,
just one little thing. I remember very clearly a conversation I overheard while waiting. I think it was in the dentist. So there were a couple of girls, well, not girls, young women, a couple of young women. They were talking about they were going to be moving here and there, and they were talking about how they liked living, in a part that was more out in the country, and they specifically said, no, we really have to we have to move to one of the buildings, live in a building in the city, because for two women on their own, it's a lot safer to live in an apartment in the city than alone in a house out in the outskirts of the city. That was one of the things they accurately observed, I would say.
Yes, so you have to know your own situation, assess your own situation against your environment, and think about along those lines instead of just reading a headline. This is the thing to do because it was good for them in that period, right? So regarding relocation, of course, there's a long-time strategic relocation that you think an environment would be good, but also it could be something sudden. So being prepared to move instantly, right? Or getting out of a bad situation. And it could be natural disaster, right? It doesn't have to be a total societal collapse. It could be a volcano, how we have seen, or it could be any other thing. What do you think? What is the basic minimum that people should have in a case where they need to relocate now? If something would happen, then they have to relocate today or tomorrow morning. what is the preparedness, or what is the basic minimum, even if they're not a prepper or a prepping guru,
Yeah.
what is the basic normal thing that people should have, right? And why?
Right. Well, that's what I describe as a VIP bag, like VIP, like very important person, but this would be your VIP, very important papers bag. So this is a little bag where you keep your birth certificates, your passports, those are essential. So passports, very important, the important papers, the cash that you have, you should have, enough cash to get by for a couple months. A couple months expenses in cash is usually a very good idea. Now, from the perspective of having to relocate, it has to be along with part of your plan. So if you have family, friends out of the state, family or friends out of the country entirely, you never expect this to happen until it does. Even something like you were just saying, the eruption of the volcano in La Palma, there's people crying their eyes out because he lost absolutely everything. And you would think you were living on top of a volcano. This could happen any minute. It happened before. It happened in the 50s or 60s and before that. So this could happen, and it still catches people by surprise. And you may be thinking, well, that's not me. Well, it is. I've talked with so many people that, house fires there's actually a very well-known survivalist prepper that's very well-known on TV, media and such. The guy lost everything in a forest fire that got to his house, burned down everything. So these are things that happen. What you have in this little bag, and this goes beyond having like a bug out bag, which is, more of the survival prepper stuff. Your VIP bag is papers, documents, cash, any gold that you have, if you have any precious metals, but you have it in a small bag because you want it to be very portable. If you have, think of it in some of the worst case scenarios. If there's a flood, if you're injured, if you have to help carry one of your kids, if you are not as mobile as you usually are, you don't want to carry around a huge bug out bag with pounds of stuff that you don't actually need for that kind of thing. You just want the essentials. So if you can get that and something else, by all means. But the tiny one with these, and look, at the end of the day, that's really all you need. If you have the insurance for it, it's probably going to be covering a lot of this stuff that you're losing. But those papers are usually a lot harder, and the cash is by far one of the most useful tools. You see this over and over and over. People caught in floods, evacuating due to war. If you're leaving Afghanistan, you want as much cash as you want. I was also listening to a guy, right? The famous picture of the baby being brought over the fence.
Yes, yeah.
That little baby. Well,
yeah.
I was just watching the interview of the parents. They actually made it to U.S. They're living in Arizona, I think. So that famous.
Were they able to reconnect?
Yes, yes.
Thank God.
And they were explaining that the husband was already on the other side of the fence.
Okay.
And it's the mother that handed over the baby to the Marine because the father was on the other side. They actually were able to get through and move, but she lost $30,000. She was taking $30,000 with her, and that was their life savings. It got stolen by the Taliban in the middle of this, but that was everything they had for this. That would allow them to just get back on their feet much quicker and better if they had kept their money, if they had gotten that out of the country. Having a plan is also essential. Look, I always insist on people getting a second passport if they can. If you have, and some people could easily get it because of Irish, English, or some other ancestry. Some are easier than others, but by all means, get it because that can be one of the more important tools you could ever possibly have.
I love that. Yeah, it makes total perfect sense. And people think about, and this is not judging them, that you need that extra utility knife, or well, not utility knife, but like knife or that prepper thing off of Amazon, but you could have acquired a passport. So think about, the legal situation, the political situation, and what is more realistic to have. Now, of course, being able to, know bushcraft and that sort of stuff could be, again, life-saving. So I'm not saying that you should not do it, but view one thing from multiple perspectives. That's very important. Moving items and valuables is hard sometimes. So yes, having cash is very important, but if you think about it and you have time to prepare and you know the destination where you're going, sometimes having the cash or having the gold or something already there, or in parts of there, not necessarily on your person, because you might be in a situation where you have to run for it and you don't have time. But you touched on gold, so now I have to ask, right? My